A little different than good morning, but good to see you all here this morning. We wrap up our series called Re-Engage. And I think over this whole time, I go back over when we started this and why we started doing it was the idea that, kind of in the fall, it would seem like, we were kind of all coming back with school starting and all of that. And we already know that within our context and everything, there's been challenges still that are going on in our world and around us. So just because we do a series doesn't mean snap, everything's going to be great. It just doesn't happen that way. But I got to tell you this, one thing that I have seen is that as we've been doing this, I have watched God move in people's hearts and lives in ways that we never thought possible. And so I'm really excited about that. I really, really cannot wait to talk about this morning, what kind of wraps us up with re-engaging. And we've talked about a few things in re-engagement. First of all, I started out by telling you that this is why we do it. The love of Christ is what compels us to do what we do. That's kind of the measure of it all. And then we asked that big question, what does love require of me? Remember the stop sign, if you were here that time? I used that and I said, you just got to take a hard stop and say, what does love require of me? And then we had Jeff in. Jeff Henderson came and he shared with us, had a great weekend with him. It was fantastic to be reminded of being for people because that's really what the church needs to be in our world today. And then from there, we introduced something brand new, the Dayton Business Breakfast, which was, a lot of people are like, what is that for? But I got to tell you, the engagement since then has been amazing for us to be able to have relationships and continue to grow some of those. Excited about where that's going to take us in the future. But then I started talking about being connected, remember? And this was a big one. Being connected in a community group is one of the things that we say because life is better connected. And then from there we said, you got to be serving. And the place to serve is right here in the church, but it also helps us make the environments that we do here be what they need to be when we're inviting people to come and be a part of this. And that was another thing that we said was invite people, because an invitation can change everything in someone's life. So today, I bring it to a conclusion with a discussion that everybody loves. We're going to talk about giving. Actually, no, I don't think we'll talk about giving. Matter of fact, this actually, what we're going to talk about today has nothing to do with giving. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and you see somebody in need and you look at them and you say, boy, if I just had more money, I would help them with that. Depending on what it was. Maybe they had a need, a medical bill, or maybe they had a school bill. Maybe there was a student. This has happened to me many times, and a lot of students here, but you're going to stand up in line to talk to me afterwards, probably after I say this. But, my wife and I have said, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could just help them go to school? Go on to college, and so that they wouldn't have all this student debt and everything. Trust me, my own kids would have been in line for that too before any of you. So you kind of get the idea. Wouldn't it have been great if I could have done this or whatever? And we maybe say, boy, that person, their car seems like it's always in disrepair. If I just had some money, I would help them. If I just had some extra money, I would do this. You know what it takes to actually help people with circumstances like that? It takes the big word we're going to talk about today, and that's generosity. Generosity is something completely different, I believe, than giving. And it really is something that anybody and everybody can be generous. I mean, everybody can be. No matter what we do, no matter where we are in our lives, no matter the things that we are involved in and everything, we can all be generous. And you might say, I don't know what you mean by that. I don't know. Well, hopefully by the time we're done today, you'll understand not only what generosity is, but where it comes from and why it's so important in our lives. Matter of fact, I want to ask you this question. I think it's important. What does it mean to be generous? What does it actually mean if you were defining it? Actually, we were looking at the word that's used in the Bible where generosity is used, and we're actually going to look at a verse here in a minute that really brings that out. But the idea of being generous is being simple. It's funny that the word generosity has to do with being simple. But the idea is that it's not only simple in its form of just seeing a need and meeting it, or to actually being ready to meet the need, or having a mindset that says, I'm going to be generous. That's just what I want to do. I want to be a generous person. It's much more than that. It actually is something that is rooted in a simple relationship that we have with God. And it's actually simple because God was the one who actually made it simple for us by showing us the greatest example of it. And so you think of this singleness and this idea of simplicity and being focused is really another idea of what the word generous means. It means to be focused on the need of something else rather than focusing on ourselves. It actually has the connotation, too, of having an openness or an open heart so that we don't really hold back anything. If you were a part of the 168 hours of prayer and you went through the prayer room, the first phase of that room was for you to sit down, and an exercise that you were encouraged to do was to hold your hands open. I want everybody to try that right now, if you can. Everybody try. Put out your hands and try to hold them open. Now hold them open as long as you can while I'm talking, okay? And see that the natural thing, you have to really work at this, don't you? To hold your hands open, because the natural thing is for them to kind of start to close. Isn't that funny? If you just now just relax and think about it. See, and your hands just kind of, what do? They kind of start to close up. It's the natural thing to do. You have to work at it to actually be open-handed. And I think it's great because in the context of what we were doing and praying about in that room had everything to do with being open-handed with God. And that's really the idea of what generosity is. And so if I were to do this, I would ask you the question, then, why should we be generous? Why should we be the ones that are generous? Why is that necessary? Aren't there people who have lots of, generosity is really for the Warren Buffetts and the Bill Gates and the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks of the world, right? Isn't that who the generous people should be? Shouldn't they be the ones that are doing, all the generosity? Because the rest of us, we are so strapped by money and everything. But actually, generosity has so much to do with a relationship with God. And I want to show you that today, and I want to take you to a passage of Scripture that just kind of starts it off. Why should we be generous? Well, Paul writes about this in the book of Ephesians in chapter 1, and he says this, "In him we have redemption through his blood," meaning Jesus. Through Jesus we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. That's everything to us. Quite honestly, if you know that in your own life for sure, then you're richer than you could ever know, because you have been given an incredible gift. You had a debt bigger than any financial debt you could ever measure it by. You had a debt that would take eternity for you to pay for, and Jesus came in and he died, shed his blood, and made that possible for that debt to be paid. And so the forgiveness of sins, you've already been made rich because of this. We'll actually see that as we talk about actual instances of giving and how people were generous with their giving. And it's in accordance with the riches of God's grace. Another word you're going to hear a lot today is grace, because that's when God gives us something we don't deserve. He actually gives us grace in a way that we don't even measure. It's extravagant giving that God does for us. Grace that he lavished on us. I don't know what comes to your mind when you think of lavished and what lavish means, but as we start to develop this morning, we continue to talk about it, just think about being given something and just being spoiled. Over and over again, you're just spoiled with being given so much. You ever felt like, oh, this is way too much? I just, that is way too much. Now, some of us will say, no, never felt that way at all. I like that, all right? So everybody take a big, deep breath for me. Okay, now relax, all right? This is going to be great. What we talk about this morning is going to bring us, I believe, if we're open to what God is doing and we stand here and we have open hands on the things that we are a part of, then God is going to use that in every person's life here this morning. Just listen to God this morning as He talks to you about it all. So if this were really true, I want to give you a point that I think is really important. God's extreme generosity to me is why I give generously to Him. This is why I actually want to give generously, is because He's given to me an extremely generous gift of forgiving my sin, making me right, but also giving me access to everything He owns. If you know anything about what the Scriptures tell us, is that Jesus Himself even said that all of this, everything has been given to you under heaven and earth, and it's one of those things that you think to yourself, really? I don't feel like I own everything. Matter of fact, I feel like I owe everything. And those are things where we have to make those decisions about what it truly means to be generous. We'll get into that as we go on. I want to take you to a story that Paul captured about a church. It was the Corinthian church. And we go to 2 Corinthians, the second letter that he wrote to them in chapter 8. And I want you to catch this. There was a group of people in Jerusalem. It was really the beginning of the church, where it really started in that day after Jesus had risen from the dead. And as they were living there were great needs among them that caused them to have incredible difficulty just living day to day. And so they were trying to meet needs, and they were trying to reach people with the gospel message, but they were actually being persecuted, and a lot of the flow just even have food to eat and water to drink, all the things that they needed. They were really stifled by because they didn't have the funds to do it. Why? Because it had been taken away from them. They had been persecuted because they were followers of Jesus. So this is what you see happening. There was a group of people in Macedonia that he starts to talk about. And Macedonia was separate from Corinth, and it wasn't the same group, but they were going through the same kind of challenges. Matter of fact, even more difficult. Let me show you. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given you. Remember the word that we said be watching for? The grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. This was actually a grace that God had given to them, and this is what it was. In the midst of a very severe trial. Anybody here had a severe trial lately? And I don't need you to raise your hand or anything like that, but I want you to think about it. That severe trial could have been the loss of a job. It could have been a bad diagnosis at the doctor. It could have been a family issue or a problem that you've been going through or difficulty. Think about this. That was a severe trial. But these people, all of them were suffering through this in the Macedonian church. But Paul says this was a grace that God gave them. Something of His grace that He gave them was to do this. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up, and it welled up. You can imagine a mixture of being joyful about being a Christian, and that's really what it was, but then on top of it, having a severe sense of poverty around them. They just didn't know where to go for the next thing. They didn't know how to make it through. This is what happened. It welled up in what? Rich generosity. And when you think about it, it made them singularly focused. They were open-handed. This is the whole concept, all right? This word generosity, what we described before, is exactly what they were going through. Then the verses go on, and it says, "For I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people." What ended up happening is that they gave, and they gave, and they gave even beyond their ability to give. They gave of everything they had. Now imagine being in a situation of poverty. Many of us would say, why aren't people giving to me? Why aren't people meeting my need? But God gave them a measure of His grace and let them see what the potential was if they were to give. I've heard this stated many times. This is not something from the Bible, but that you never see any generous person that feels like they're poor. I don't know whether that's true or not, but if you might say, well, I feel poor. You know, I've been generous a lot and I still feel poor. That may be the case. I have no idea. But I heard that statement, and I thought it started making me think. It started making me think of these people and what they go through. I'll just tell you this. They became generous, and then what happens? After they became generous, they heard of other people giving and what the other churches were doing for the church in Jerusalem that was in trouble. Here was a church and a group of people, not just a place where they met, but a group of people, this church in Macedonia. And what did they do? Did they say, we want an offering too? We need an offering. We're in bed. No. They said, we heard of a need of somebody in Jerusalem. And the people in Jerusalem were in need. And they didn't worry about their own need. What did they say? We're going to take care of that. We're going to do whatever we can. Can I just tell you the principle that is clear? Generosity leads to more generosity. Generosity leads to more generosity. When we actually are thinking of being singularly focused and open-handed for God to use what we have to help other people, we really takes the burden of our own needs off of us, and then it gives us an opportunity to be involved in the lives of other people. Now, so far, in talking about this, these are really great principles, but I want to show you something. If you didn't know this, within our church, when we give, every dollar you give, there is a portion of that goes to take care of people that are serving around the world. We have several that are on a list of people that we have chosen to be a part of in what they do in their ministries around the world. And we're always evaluating that, always looking for the opportunities. But one of the groups, and you've heard me say it many times, this group that is in Cuba. Now, I don't know, I know that when I'm around here, I know that it's hard to even talk about Cuba because a lot of you either work, for the government or you're with a contractor that supports the government, and I can't tell you much, all right? But I can tell you some of this, all right? So those of you who think you got to plug your ears and go la, 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 because you don't want to hear about it because you might be breaking protocol or whatever, I understand. I totally get that. But I want to give you this part of the story. Here's a group of people that right now have gone through incredible problems when it comes to food supply. Matter of fact, we have sent them money a few times, and we have to come up with creative ways because I can't just transfer from my bank account to their bank account. It doesn't work that way. And so I'm trying to figure out how to do it. So there have been different people who have actually been able to travel in and take the funds into them and everything. And so part of the offerings that we take up here, part of the generosity that God's put on your heart actually goes to take care of the needs of people in this church or these churches. There are actually 4 churches with the name Fair Creek del Sur, which means Fair Creek of the South. And so that's what they label themselves. That's what's on their signs. It's crazy. They have great big orange round leaf symbols like we do everywhere. They're actually using the word for, except it's not for in Spanish. All right, it's poor, but you get the idea, right? And so here, when you think of this, I want to show you what they have done. They took funds that we sent to them, and this just happened recently. They took the funds that are sent to us, and then they took up an offering, and one of the offerings they took up was when they had food in their pantry, they all said, bring the food in. Bring the food in. And so they took up offerings, and this is at one of the small church plants where they put together food to take out to the people in their neighborhood, not for people in the church. The church came together and generously gave of their food. They also gave of money and took money that we had given to the church, and they put it toward a project they call For Our Neighbors. And so as they do this is incredible when you think of this, they actually did exactly what the Macedonian church did. All right? Here, the Macedonian church was welled up with need. They had all kinds of poverty. But what did they do? They thought of their neighbor. And Maito, who is the lead pastor of all the 4 churches, this is what he said. Every time we do this, we never go hungry. This is great. Now, I just want to show you just a little bit more. Here's another picture of this, and you can actually, if you can see it close enough, this was from an actual social media post. They're allowed to do Facebook in Cuba. It's available to them. But here is the people who were a part of this. Uslibi, he's one of the pastors. And then more of the food that they brought in at their church and put it together for them. And then some of the people that were neighbors of the church or in that community that they took it to and handed it to. This is exactly the concept. They're thinking of the grace that God has given them, and now they are actually sharing it. Isn't it great? I mean, I don't know about you, but this just makes me think, wow. And we were a part of this. See that food right there? We were a part of that because of our generosity. And then a lot of us, I was just thinking to myself, I didn't have to sacrifice really anything. I've eaten all during this period of time. I've not had to worry about where my food comes from. Why? Because God has supplied. God has taken care of it. And out of generosity that we have done together, we gave to them, and then they were able to take it and give on. They live out that message of the Macedonian church. And I think it's amazing to me to see how much they do this. I want to tell you that being generous is the opportunity to join in God's plan. That's exactly how He has it set up. Being generous is the opportunity that God gives us to be a part of what He's doing. I just tell you this, God does not need our money. Cricket, cricket, cricket. Then why do we do this then? Why are you talking about this? Because one of the ways that God has enabled His plan to be accomplished is through his church, the local churches that are around, to meet the needs of people. So this plan that He has, it involves us. The church is His plan, and it's the hope of the world. The church represents what Jesus is doing in the world today. A part of His plan is for us to be generous, and as we're generous, He allows us to take care of the needs around us and be the church like we're called to be the church. It allows us to do things that we never thought possible. Provide environments, all right? This is an environment. And He provides environments like where the kids are right now and the middle schoolers are right now. And He provides those different things. And when we give, it makes those possible. But then on top of that, it allows us to go into our community and even as far as Cuba and other places around the world, where when we're generous, it allows us to see God's plan accomplished through His church. That's His plan. And I take you back here to 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and in verse 5. This is why it happens. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves, first of all, to the Lord. This is where it all comes from. This is where it starts. This is where that idea of open hands comes from. It means that we give of ourselves from our life. We give of our life for God to use. We're involved in His plan, and then from there, God uses that to be involved in the lives of people. But it first starts when we do business with God. Please don't think that I'm standing up here asking you to give more money today. I'm hoping to set you up to hear God telling you what generosity really looks like and how you can be used. How God can take what you have and what He's given you and actually put it into use in His plan. And it was seen in their lives. It exceeded the expectations because they didn't try to have to wrestle through this. Well, how can I want to give, but I can only give this much because I want to do some things over here. I've already budgeted this and I've already budgeted that. Really, generosity starts and says, well, I'm going to give this and then I'll figure out what I do with the rest. I'll figure out what I do. Generosity starts with the Lord in our life. First of all, the Lord. Generosity is central to your decision to follow Jesus. It's central to it, to the relationship we have with Him, to the idea that everything that we are about, because if we hang on to anything, and isn't it true? Aren't you proud when you get that first? Anybody remember your first paycheck? You know, some of you, you're shaking your head. You remember when you get your first, it wasn't all that long ago, was it? And so, but you got your first paycheck. I mean, I remember that. And I was like, who is Uncle FICA? You know, why do I have to pay him? What's going on here? You know, do you remember that? It's like you couldn't wait. You'd add it up. This is how much I get an hour, and this is what I'm going to, and then you get that check, and it's like, hey, there's funny math going on here, you know? But you remember getting that check, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do with this? Couldn't, you know, man, things click off in your mind. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. My first check, I already had bought my car, you know, my new bachelor pad, all these things that I was wanting with this money that I wanted to do with it. Stereo system, I love stereos. You know, I love to have music. You know, these days, you know, you got it on your phone, pop these little things in your head, and it's better sound than I ever had on that stereo that had 4 speakers and all this stuff in my room. I remember that. I got to tell you something. Those things are not what are central to your life. What's central to your life is Jesus. And when He is central to your life, then everything else takes a priority. You don't have the pressure of trying to actually meet up to this standard around you that you've got to succeed, or you've got to have more than everybody else, or you've got to continue. You actually start to be more content. It's funny how that works. When you actually are open-handed with God and say, okay, Lord, I'm on purpose, saying, here's my life, here's everything I have, here's all I've got. Here it is, God. Now you use it. And I'm here to be along for the ride. You know, I want to see what you're going to do. And it's amazing because it's central to your decision to follow Jesus. I'll just tell you this. I don't think you can say, I'm totally submitted to the lordship and leadership of Jesus in my life if you're hanging on to some of the things that you have in your possession. It's really hard to be able to do that. Those are tough things to hear, but I can tell you what, I've learned it, and I've learned it the hard way sometimes, but when I have found that God has led me to be generous or to do something that I didn't even think I could do, and then all of a sudden it's amazing what God then does in my own heart and my own life, and how real He seems to me when that happens. So, you know, the more I look at all this, it's crazy. I want to take you back to the verses here. And this is critical because when thinking about how it all comes together, he talks to them in a way and he says, you've got things you measure your life on and your walk with God. You've got things that you're measuring it on. I do this. I'm a good Christian, or I'm a good person because I do these things. But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, I mean, you can be doing a lot of things. You can be doing a lot of things with your life where it's actually you are a good person. You're really trying. You're doing these things, and they could have rested on that. But here's what he says. This is where it really is measured and how it comes out. See that you also excel in this grace of giving. Now you see the two words come together. This idea of grace, God giving to us, and now you see this idea of what it really means. This grace of giving, grace giving. Have you ever thought of God's grace in your life? Have you ever thought of what it looks like and how much God has given you when it comes to this? This is where he's trying to describe it to them, and he says, look, think about it. You've done a lot of things, Corinthian church. I just told you a story about the Macedonian church and what they did. You guys are really good at faith and speech and knowledge. Oh man, you know things. You know, you've really learned things about the Bible and about God and who He is. You've got an earnestness, you know, just about doing it. You're fired up. And in the love we have kindled in you, isn't it great? I can do anything in the church, but boy, stay out of my wallet, Greg. You know, that's the point. I'm not here to be in your wallet. I got a wallet. I got to be concerned about myself. It has nothing to do with wanting your money. Okay? Has nothing to do with that. This has to do with a principle that is in line with God's grace, and that's what Paul was teaching the Corinthians. I've got to tell you, the principles that come out of this, he even goes further. He says, I am not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. He says, I want to compare you're doing a lot of great things, but look at what the Macedonians have done. Compare it to that. Compare it to the Cuban church. What we're doing. And so he even goes further and he says, for the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was yet rich, this is how you know he gave you grace. He was rich. Let's face it, he owned everything. Yet for your sake, he became poor. He came here to earth, didn't bring all of his riches with him, didn't walk around, making it rain everywhere he went, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. He became as poor as possible, dying the death of a person who deserved execution in the Roman Empire. He died that death to pay for us, our sin, so that we might be rich. Imagine that. It just blows my mind, but I think you got to know this. Jesus gave up his life to make us rich. Jesus gave up his life to make us rich. And when you consider that, you see what grace really is. Grace is an extravagant gift. An extravagant gift. And can I just say this? Being extremely generous is the appropriate response to God's gift of grace to us. I want to show you what else the verses say, but later in a different chapter. Just later on to this, he says, remember this. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. You can count that this is a promise from God. It's kind of a warning, and it's really a promise. And it's not a matter of, I'll give if I see everybody else giving. Or you could compare it and say, and I'm not really sure the church really needs my money. It seems like they've got plenty. It really is kind of irrational to even think that way. Because it isn't about measuring up or meeting any kind of budget. It's just about being in a place where we actually are being generous with what God has given us, so that with open hands we say, God, here I am. Take everything that I am. And when you start to think of it from that standpoint, it begins to be easier and it begins to be clearer and more simple to understand what God is trying to accomplish in us. But then look at verse 7. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give. Not reluctantly or under compulsion. That's why today I'm not here to try to pull on your emotions. I'm not here to try to do that. I'm trying to give you the principle of what it is that God wants us to do as followers of Jesus. If we're followers of Jesus, then we shouldn't give reluctantly or under compulsion. Because if you do that, that's just going to be emotional giving. And quite honestly, you don't even think about that. You may give because of something that comes up, and it'd be very easy to do that. As we get closer to Be Rich, which is next Sunday, and we start talking about that special offering we will take, and you might say, I don't know about that. What are you talking about? Let me tell you. In just a second, here's the point. You could think, I need to do that, I guess. I could do that. But the point comes down to, there has to be more to it than that. I'll just tell you, he says, for God loves a cheerful giver. Somebody who's happy about it, Not going, okay, here's my $20. That's not generous. That's not even a measure. Now, for you, $20 might be a generous gift. It's not about the amount. It has everything to do with the heart and whether the hands are open or they're like, here's 20. See? Much different. I got to tell you this. Generous people make a generous church. That's what I think we should be known for. I think when I look at our community, I think of trying to provide the best we can here, in this place. I wish I could have picked you all up and brought you over and let you peek in a door with me right before I came up on this platform today. Because right over here in this room are like 2,000 middle schoolers. Okay? At least it sounded like it. Okay? But when I see that and I think to myself, this isn't about building them a building, although that may be exactly what we're going to have to do. And I hope we are faced with that. I hope we have to build them another building. Let's get them out of here. No, I mean, think about this though. I looked at each one of them and I thought, oh my goodness, look at their life. And it really started to make me realize this is why I have to talk to you about this today. Because God has called us together to be a generous church. To not only meet the needs of them, but the ones that are out there and the ones that are, about, what is it? I can't remember how many thousand miles it is to Cuba and even in other places around the world. God's called us to be generous, to meet those needs and do the things He's called us to do. And is it possible for those needs to be met? Absolutely. If we don't just give, but we become generous. It's much different. So I want to talk to you in this way. If you think about what it is, there's 3 ways to consider being generous. This is how you know practically that you've become really generous. Planned generosity. Planned means that you've decided in your heart, this is how much I'm going to give. This is what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to stop spending more than I make. I'm actually going to get myself corrected when it comes to debt. Can you imagine if you could go back and capture all that money you've wasted in your life? I've thought this many times. How much money I've wasted and it could all just be lumped into a checking account that I could just do whatever I wanted to with. And then my mind started going through, oh yeah, I would do this. And then I thought, whoa. All that waste is why I couldn't be generous before. All I would be doing is just wasting it again. I started thinking, how on purpose could I be? I have to have a plan for this. I have to determine that I'm going to make it a part of my life. And then there needs to be a percentage. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Old teaching, the people of Israel were told to tithe, to give 1/10 of what they had. But actually, if you were to go through all the offerings that they were asked and requested to give, it actually was not just 10%, it actually was closer to about 40%. Anybody like the idea of just giving away 40% of what you make? But that's what they did. They did it as a practice because it showed that God was the one that was in control of everything, that they weren't the ones gripping it and holding it. Now, I'm not telling you that 10% is the magic number. Many of us look at that and say that tithing should be what we do today, that everyone should give 10%. I want to tell you this, that actually I think it's more closer to what Paul says, and that's a grace giving. So I want you to just think of it from this perspective. If you're looking for the right percentage that you want to give, have you ever thought of just saying, God, where would I be without your grace in my life? And you think about that and compare your giving to the grace that God has given you. And does it measure up? 10% may be way too low in your life. 10% may be just a place. And honestly, I think a lot of us, we put that on, and I heard it described this way. It's like putting training wheels on a bicycle and leaving them on your whole life. My wife and I just got bikes. I can't imagine riding down the bike path with training wheels on, Although I do like attention at times. I think that might be a way to do it. But giving a certain percentage like that may be just like having training wheels on your whole life when it comes to your walk with God and how much He really has control over everything in your life. So when I look at this, I just think a percentage is important. But when it comes to personal, being personal means that my life can be touched at any time by God to do whatever's necessary. And I have planned and I've put a percentage in to take care of the things, to be a part of God's plan in His church. And I do that faithfully and regularly, and I do that all the time. I plan to do it. But then I've got enough margin in my life that I can be planned enough that when spontaneous opportunities or special times of generosity can happen for me. Have you ever walked through the grocery store and you get in line and somebody is short $10 or something like that, and they say, just put this back? Wouldn't you like to be the one that just walks up and says, hey, just put the whole thing on my card? Put the whole thing on my debit card. Or, here, I've got some extra cash. Here, take that. Or have you ever seen somebody pull into a gas station and their car is just falling apart? That might be me, all right? But you see them and they pull in and you're like, boy, and it may be like a lady who gets out and she's got 3 kids in the back and they're screaming and they're hollering and you can tell the car is just barely running and she's scraping together, money to take in to pay. Wouldn't it be great just go over and slide your card in and pay for her gas? Fill it up. Fill it up. You ever thought of doing that? Or have you ever been a part of this when you see somebody on back behind you and it's a police officer, a fireman, somebody in the military? Now I know, they all get paid, I realize. But wouldn't it be great just to say, hey, look, I got his coffee. I got his meal, her meal. Thanks for what you do. I just want to say thank you. Ever thought to do that? See, that's the plan. That's that plan percentage allows you then to have margin. Not only have you then given to your church, the place where God's plan is being put in place. And may I just say this? Please have confidence in what God is doing here. Hopefully you can see that. We're not in any way trying to take money and be extravagant. We're trying to be good stewards of the money. Let me just tell you, being personal comes down to even this. How many of you have made an Amazon purchase in the last couple of weeks? Last 2 weeks? How many of you have made an Amazon purchase? Okay, what they say is the average Amazon purchase is about $39.95. That's still the same as it was last year. Roughly the average. I'm going to ask you to give up an Amazon purchase. Okay? I'm going to ask you first to step back and say, how can I be generous? What planned and percentage can I be giving regularly to the plan of this church, the local church that God has put in place right here that you are? It's not this building. It's not the programs. The church is the people. So this group of people, we've been called to this community and what we're doing. You should be giving here regularly. Let me just tell you this. We've got an opportunity now to be rich in good deeds during this campaign. You give $39.95. You give $39.95, and you can do that as many times as you want, but you can even start today. So the first thing is on your app that John very clearly told you how to use. All right? You open your app up, or you can actually, if you still like paper checks, God bless you, it's great. Do it however you like. But you write that down, you fill out that check, whatever, and you give regularly to your church, but then you say, I'm going to sacrifice one Amazon purchase. Or it might be something else, It might not be an Amazon thing. It may be something else that you do regularly. I say $39.95, that's what? Like 1.5 lattes at a certain coffee shop. Okay? So, maybe sacrifice that, Or at Aldi, it's like a cartload of stuff, whatever. But you decide you're going to give that. You can start doing that today. I'm going to tell you something. This is important. God will use a generous church. God will use a generous church. And not only will he use a generous church, look at what he does. The verse I want to show you, 2 Corinthians 9:8, and God is able to bless you. What's the word? Say it out loud. Abundantly. So that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. See, God can use us together. And yes, together, we're Fair Creek. The people, us, we're Fair Creek. This building isn't. This property isn't. All things that people generously gave in the past to make possible. But now we see that God could use us. Just remember this principle that's clear. God's extreme generosity to me is why I give generously to him. This is why I give. I give because he has given to me. And it changes